Okay, so we're ready to start. Let's see, I thought I had shared my screen with you. I think I have. Here we go. Okay. So the question is, when it comes to a person doing a degrading act, right? That's what we were talking about yesterday, that we said that a person is not allowed to bring harm upon themselves, even though they think, hey, it's my body, I can do whatever I want. No, you don't have permission to do something that's going to be harmful to yourself, or even to cause you humiliation publicly. But then, what Rav Stern was bringing in the Biurim was, what about the fact that the Gemara says that it is preferred to degrade yourself if it means you need to support your family? Better that you should be a garbage man and support your family, even if you're a great scholar, a great Talmud Chacham. Okay, so so he says. So what he was basically saying is that it depends on whether it's the type of degradation that is socially acceptable, or a type of degradation that is not socially acceptable, that most people would not submit themselves to. All right. So he says that seems to him to be the distinction. What I'd like to skip to is Od Hiksha Haravalav. He says another question that was brought on the Yam Shel Shlomo. Let's see, it's on page Kuf Pehei in the Biurim, about a dozen lines down after the parentheses. Last two words on the line. Od Hiksha Haravalav Masha Oser Litzaer Gufo. He says, we know that the Rav Shulchan Aruch says that you're not allowed to afflict your body. He says, the Tzarachi and Gadol mi Yaakov Avinu sha'achlo chorei v'kerach. He says, what about Yaakov, who afflicted himself for 20 years when he was in Lavan's house, as the Torah testifies, that he ate heat and ice, like he had to consume, he had to be out in the harshest weather conditions, watching his father-in-law's flock. It sounds like from this question that you think that it's prohibited to afflict yourself in order to make money. But the Yam Shel Shlomo never meant that. In other words, the person who was asking this question on the Yam Shel Shlomo. He says, the only time that it's prohibited to injure yourself, he says, because the Yam Shel Shlomo says that if there's a productive purpose in injuring yourself or causing yourself bodily harm, so then there are many poskim, the Ramah and the Tur, say that it is permissible. Because of Sham Hayam Shel Shlomo v'zeloshano umikol makom afilu lefi harama eno muter elo litzorech. But then the Yam Shel Shlomo comments on that. He says, but that's only permissible if there is an identifiable need. If there's no productive outcome in causing injury, then you can't even injure inanimate objects. You can't even tear a garment for no productive reason, because there's a prohibition of bal tashchis. Forget about the prohibition of self-affliction. You've also got the prohibition of bal tashchis, that you're not allowed to wantonly destroy things that God put in this world. He says, there is an example of where you're allowed to be destructive if it's to bring fear or to instill some kind of discipline in your house. Let's say a father can tear up some money or destroy money to show that he wants to give some kind of disciplinary message to his children. So too, it would be permitted to cause yourself injury if there is a need. V'li nira de halacha kimasnisin sha'asur lachbol u'levayish ba'atzma akam devarav. And then he finishes off by saying that it is prohibited to injure or to embarrass yourself gratuitously. And right, anyway. But the bottom line is that he ends up saying that there's no permission granted to cause yourself bodily harm, such as causing yourself an injury. But if it's just to strain your body and to really expend a lot of energy and strain yourself, or to work strenuously, that you're allowed to do. In other words, yes, even if there's the Maharshal is basically saying that you're not allowed to cause yourself injury, even for parnasa. Like if you know you're going to get a hernia, or it's likely you're going to get a hernia, even for work, you're not permitted to do that, right? But you are allowed to exert yourself strenuously, even though you know that the cumulative effect over the course of decades might be that, you'll eventually wear yourself out. You won't be able to continue doing it. That you are allowed to do. He says that for sure. There's no concern about that. Okay. So anyway, he just wanted to clarify that point, is that there's a difference between exerting yourself strenuously for work and injuring yourself for work. Injuring yourself, you're not allowed to do, even if it's for parnasa reasons. Okay. The next biurim, the lo litzaro b'shum tsar, that you're not allowed to cause another person any pain, right? Where we talked about, we talked about embarrassing a person, insulting a person, even if they give you permission, you're not permitted to do that. It's interesting. Like, what would be the din if someone offered, we want to do a celebrity roast, we want to put you in the hot seat and just hurl insults at you. It could be that since everyone knows that that's comedic and that it's not meant seriously, maybe it could be permitted. But here we're talking about causing someone emotional pain. So he has an interesting shaila in the biurim over here. He says, "Ulahayir chavero mishanato." Are you allowed to wake somebody up? So he says, "Vadai havi iser gomer." That's also going to be usher in halacha, unless, of course, the person wants you to wake him up. The loshna mitzar da onoas devarim da asrator. It's no different from onoas devarim, insulting a person and causing a person emotional pain. He says that's also prohibited by the Torah. Hu hadin bitzar shenigram lo al yedei hafra'as shinasa. And similarly, it's also prohibited to just gratuitously wake someone up from their sleep. And some say that it's included in the prohibition where the Torah prohibits causing pain to any living creature. We've established already in our previous studies that it's a biblical prohibition to cause pain to all living creatures. V'ayin birkei Yosef Yoredeya Siman Shinayin Bezos Beis Shehivi Plugta Le'inyan Prika Uteina Ba'adam because of Sham Da'af L'das Hashol Laharash B'Dispir Le'dein Prika Uteina Ba'adam Yesh Makam Lomar Delo Polig Ela B'Prika Uteina Misham Diyesh Al Ze Limud Miyuchad An Sham Aval B'Shar Tzar Adam Ba'alma Yesh Lomar Di'ika Mishum Tzar Ba'Lechaim Miyudeoraisa Ayin Sham. So he basically says that, he goes into this side discussion. There's a whole question of whether the mitzvah of prika and te'ina applies to human beings. What is prika and te'ina? It is the mitzvah where the Torah says that if you see an animal buckling under its load, you have a mitzvah either to help readjust its load or to help unload the animal or to help load up the animal. So the question is does that mitzvah apply when you see a human being carrying a huge bundle of packages? Is there a special mitzvah? But everyone agrees that if you see a person in pain, you have an obligation to help alleviate their pain, right? It's either tsar balei chayim, lo samad al dam re'echa, do not stand idly by your friend's blood. There could be a number of different arguments, but everyone would certainly agree that to cause a person gratuitous either emotional or physical pain, is usher, and included in that is the prohibition of just waking someone up for no reason. Ayin sham b'shulchan aruch Yeridei siman shenai beisif aleph beramo b'shach b'svir le'lechalek ben iser Torah l'Rabbanan. What if you want to wake a person up in order to prevent them from committing a sin? So some poskim want to suggest that there would be a difference between whether it's a biblical sin or a rabbinic sin. The imhu over al iser Torah tzrichim lahakitzo lahatzilu min ha'isser. He says, let's say a person, if he sleeps through, let's say the Seder, the Pesach Seder, he's not going to eat matzah. So some say there's a mitzvah to wake him up so he can fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah. Masha'in kain be'isser derabanan. But if it's only a biblical, rabbinic prohibition, some poskim would say that you can't wake him up for that. Uvamakom shetzarach l'kayim mitzvahs aseh, she'im hayayashen mitzarim oso u'meirim oso ad sheyikra pasuk rishon. He says there's a the Shulchan Aruch writes that if a person is asleep and the time for reciting Kriya Shema has arrived, then there's a mitzvah to wake up the person so that he can recite the very first pasuk of Shema, because that's a biblical commandment. Uveshailos Uchuas Karen LaDavid Simin Yudches Herich Ladun Be'inyan Mishu Hu Yashen Bizman Tefila Im Chaver Mechuyev Lahakitzo Kedei Shelo Yavor Zman Tefilo Kedei Shispalul B'Tzibor. The Sefer Karen LaDavid asks a question. He says, your friend is sleeping, you're in the yeshiva dormitory, and you want to do right by others. So your friend is sleeping, and you're worried that he's going to miss the minyan, okay? So you want to do the virtuous thing. So should you wake him up so that he can go to minyan, or that he doesn't miss the time of davening? Umasik sham dim hu yodea shechavero makbid al kach shelo lavor zman tefilo mitzvah al kach mispatel min mitzvah. So he says you have to make a judgment call. If you know that your friend who's fast asleep will be pained by the fact that he missed minyan, so then it's considered an act of chesed to wake him up, because he'll appreciate it that you woke him up. But that's the whole issue, is that where does this issur of Gezel Shena come from? Someone may argue that it's coming from the prohibition of stealing. You're stealing someone's sleep, but he's saying it comes from the fact that it's causing a person tsar. If a person, so that's why he says, if a person wants to sleep and he's the type of person who is not really into davening, and you know that he's not going to be pained if he wakes up late and missed tefillah, so then you're not obligated to wake him up, and you should just leave him alone. Ulam lanias daiti yesh makom iun b'dvarav mehadakasav hachai adam klal samach zayin sif yud aleph le'inyan lahakitz aviv b'zel Hashem. But there's an interesting Chaye Adam who states the following regarding waking up your father. He says, "V'chein kishemikitzo lelechet lebeit hakneset or ledvar mitzvah shekulam chayavim b'chavod hamakom." So he says that you're allowed to wake up, or you're supposed to wake up your father to go to shul or to do a mitzvah, because that's not considered to be disrespect to a parent, because everyone is obligated to honor God, even your father. He quotes the Sefer Chasidim Siman Shin Lamed Zayin Ad Kam Loshano. It sounds from the Chaye Adam that you should always wake up someone to do a mitzvah. And he doesn't make any distinction between a rabbinic law or a biblical law. And going to shul is only a rabbinic law. There's no biblical commandment. And it seems that way from the Sefer Chasidim itself. And he goes and he quotes the Sefer Chasidim, which we'll skip. And he says, and then he brings from the Mishnah Berurah. He quotes the Mishnah Berurah in Siman Tov Reish Ayin Beis having to do with Chanukah. that he says, "De'im shachach onenas v'lo hidlik ner Chanukah ad sheyashnu kol bnei abayis, yakitz bezo gimel mehem v'yadlik ad kan l'shono." There's a halacha that the Mishnah Berurah brought that let's say you get home very, very late from work and everyone's already asleep, or let's say you just came from off the road, or you just flew in and you got in at 1 a.m. into the house. You didn't light Hanukkah candles. So how are you supposed to fulfill the mitzvah if everyone is asleep? We know that in order to make the bracha, you have to do it at a time when people are still out on the street, or there's someone to watch you do your mitzvah. So the Mishnah Berurah quotes from the Sefer Chemed Moshe that you're supposed to wake up 2 or 3 members of your family in order to have them participate in the mitzvah so you can make the bracha. So it's a very difficult halacha to understand. If you're not allowed to wake someone up for a rabbinic law, what right do you have to interrupt your family members' sleep in order to do this mitzvah? He says, "V'lechora yesh lahavin dvarav madua mutar lo lahakitza mavor atzmo sherotze l'kayim mitzvahs ner Chanukah." Right, that's his question. He says, "Achi shlomer deshamayri shagam heim lo yatsu adayin yidei chovas hadlaka." One answer could be is that they too did not yet fulfill their mitzvah, and therefore you're doing them a favor by waking them all up and saying, "Come on, chevra, let's go light." Because after all, we know from another halacha in Hanukkah candles that if everyone else in the house already lit and it was in your house, you're not obligated to light anymore, because the mitzvah is ner ishu veito, the candle being lit in the home. If someone lit candles in my home already, then I'm off the hook. So it must be that we're talking about where your wife and kids have not yet lit the menorah because your flight was delayed. You were supposed to come home at 9 o'clock. You didn't end up coming home until 1 a.m. and they fell asleep, and they just didn't end up lighting. And that's what gives you the right to wake them up. And therefore, even if you have more people in the family, let's say you got 7 kids, you don't have to wake all of them up. You just have to wake up some of them, because as long as the menorah is lit in the house, the whole house is yotze. Okay? The logara meilu lo nimtzarmaz babayit to mikol makom yotzim dechova kimavur the poskim in Ami Yeshlomer the Spirit Leila Chemed Moshe the Shani Bnei Beis and Yishtu Vanav the Yishlo Rishus Lakitzim Afilim Heikfar Yatsu. Another answer could be is that the members of your house, your wife and children, are different because they're under sort of your tutelage. So even if they've already fulfilled the mitzvah, permission is granted to wake up family members in order to help you do a mitzvah. Because they are sort of subservient to the balabayas. And according to this, if a yeshiva bacher gets back late to his dorm late at night on Hanukkah, and it gets back at 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning and everyone's already asleep, he would not have license, he would not have permission to just wantonly wake up one of the bachrim in his dorm room to let him make the bracha. That you would not be allowed to do. Maybe permission is only granted because these members are members of your household and they're under your tutelage. As ein lo rishos lahakitzim kedei sheyuchal levarich. Achakati yesh la'ayin lefi ma shekasav v'magen Avram the bebirkas hamitzvah shekol yisrael arevim ze bazeh v'shechaveru lo yatsa havi ki'ilu hu lo yatsa ayin sham im ken ulai nomar de b'chol gavni rishai lahakitzam. But maybe there's an argument to be made that even a yeshiva bacher could wake up other guys in his dorm, because since you are responsible and I'm responsible for you, you're responsible for me, we all have to make sure that we do our mitzvahs. Maybe that gives me license to wake you because you're responsible for me to make sure that I fulfill my mitzvah. Okay, but he says, I don't agree with that. Together, because communal or mutual responsibility for each other has limits. He says, Because you could take that argument ad infinitum to its logical conclusion, and you could say you have six guys who were just all traveling on a flight. They got in at 1 a.m. So you could argue, well, if everyone is responsible to make sure that I fulfill my mitzvahs, I didn't daven ma'ariv with a minyan yet. So let me wake up four of my neighbors and get them to join me for a minyan. You're going to have very cranky neighbors after a while, if we take this to its most logical conclusion. And therefore, he doesn't think that that's accurate. He doesn't think that you can make that argument. And then he says, I refer you to the tshuva of Mincha Shlomo, that afilu le'inyan chilul Shabbos, im yesh ner eitzel hashachen de'ein tzorech laha'iro, elashari lahadlik avur hachola ayin sham. He says, as far as Shabbos violation, I'm just trying to think, what is this case over here? I think what we're talking about is, let's say you have a sick person in your house and you need to turn on the heat for them, or you need to turn on a lantern for the sake of the sick person. And it's certainly better to minimize the amount of Chilul Shabbos that you do. So one option is to take an already lit lantern from your neighbor's house, or the other option is to light the lantern yourself. Well, what if it's 1 o'clock in the morning? Are you allowed to wake up your neighbor and say, well, I noticed that in your window you have a lantern, and I didn't want to light the lantern myself, so I decided I was going to wake you to borrow your lantern. No, that doesn't work. It is better for you to light the lantern yourself and do the higher Shabbos violation than to wake up your neighbor. And then he says, I would also argue that davening with a minyan is less of a rabbinic obligation than other rabbinic commandments, because under many circumstances one can exempt themselves from davening with a minyan, whereas by other rabbinic laws that are like, if you don't do it, you won't have a chance to do it again, let's say hearing the Megillah. I once had a guy in yeshiva came to me at about half an hour before sunset on the day of Purim. He said, I just woke up. I didn't have a chance to hear the Megillah. Could you lean it for me? Right? So what if a guy is still sleeping because he partied all night the night of Purim? Do I have a mitzvah to wake him so that he can hear the Megillah on Purim day? He says, maybe that's different. Maybe, but here's another case. What would I be allowed to wake someone else and ask them if I could borrow their Megillah so that I could read the Megillah? Can I wake up someone else and disturb their sleep so that they can help me fulfill my mitzvah? But he says, it would seem to me that even in that scenario, you should not be permitted to wake him up, especially if we conclude that waking someone up from their sleep is a biblical prohibition. So since when is it mutter for me to wake someone else and steal their sleep so that I can do a mitzvah for me? And he basically ends off with saying as follows. If there's a mitzvah deoraisa that I can help someone else fulfill, or they could help me fulfill that mitzvah deoraisa, perhaps there's more of an argument to permit me waking someone else up for that purpose. But for a mitzvah derabanan, he feels that there's no license granted for that purpose. And so one has to be very circumspect. We are all Jews who have religious needs and we have religious imperatives that we want to be able to fulfill. But we have to be sure that if in the course of doing that mitzvah, we're going to have to wake someone up from their slumber, we have to be very careful about that because it may not be permitted. A guy, and I'm very sentimental and emotional about this also. I'm in my year of saying Kaddish. What if I get back from a flight, it's close to midnight, and I've got 9 guys to help me make the minyan. And the question is, can I wake up my neighbor in order to ask him to be the 10th man, right? So it seems like from what Rav Stern is suggesting is you don't have a right to do that. Why should have his sleep disrupted so that you could do a rabbinic mitzvah? Now, granted, it's an emotional thing. There's a lot of sentimentality to not missing out on a Kaddish, but it's only a rabbinic obligation. It's not a biblical obligation. You're emotionally attached to it, of course, but that doesn't give you license to wake someone up. Now, yeah, I mean, there's so many different circumstances where you could ask someone else to say Kaddish for you. Now, what you might be able to do is as follows. You realize your plane is delayed and you're not going to make it to Minyan. So you call up your friend and you say to him, I may not get back until midnight tonight. Are you going to be available to make the minyan? And he says, sure. What time are you getting back? Well, I may get back midnight 1. He says, I don't care what time it is. You need to say Kaddish. Wake me up as soon as you get it. A good friend might be prepared to do that, right? They'll say, look, for you, I know what it's like to say Kaddish. I know how important it is to you. I don't care what time it is. You wake me up and I'll be there. Right. So if the guy says that, then he's expressly granting you permission. He wants you to wake him up. But if the guy hasn't had that conversation with you, so then there really is no heter to disrupt someone else's sleep so that you can do a mitzvah. I'm sorry, someone wanted to say something? Go ahead.
What if you have an alternative like saying a Mishnah?
I mean, there's always alternatives. We learned that throughout COVID when we were in lockdown, right? Mm-hmm. We learned that there are alternatives to saying Kaddish with a minyan. So yeah, but that's the point. But there is a certain sentimentality. There's an emotional attachment to reciting Kaddish or to do other mitzvahs. Now, again, remember he brought down from this posek who said that you have to know the temperament of the person that you're dealing with. Let's say there's a good friend that you have. You know that if he were to discover that he slept through a certain mitzvah, he would be very upset. How come no one woke me? So then you have a mitzvah to wake him up. But if you have no indication that a person would be upset sleeping through a mitzvah, you can't become the shomrim. You can't become the mitzvah police and start waking people up so that they can do their mitzvahs.
So, Rabbi, in the scenario you painted, does it matter whether the individual? I appreciate it's only a rabbinic mitzvah anyway, and particularly Marav is even less. But does it matter whether the person has fulfilled their mitzvah already, like they've already done Marav, or does that make any difference?
I don't think it makes a difference. It doesn't make a difference. No, even if you know that the other guy hasn't daven Marav. Let's say a lot of people don't daven Marav on a regular basis. We're not here to criticize them. But the fact of the matter is that not everyone davens Ma'ariv, but you want to make a minyan. And so you can't just say, well, I wanted to do you a favor because I know you didn't daven Ma'ariv either. So I decided I would wake you at 1 o'clock in the morning so that we could do the mitzvah together. What a friend am I, huh? Right. What I'm such a great friend.
But I'm not going to do it tomorrow night when I have my own minyan. Yeah. Right. So the litmus test, I mean, obviously you're not doing it for that purpose, but okay, I just wanted to make sure because we talked about that a little bit with respect to lighting Hanukkah candles, and did your family fall asleep without benefiting from that mitzvah or not?
Yeah. So Rav Stern's conclusion is that Rav Stern's conclusion is that it would only be permitted for family members since they're under your control. I see. A special license, like I'm allowed to wake up my son, my high school son, if I want to get him to go to minyan. Now, this is an issue of parenting. What is wise and what is unwise? When is it appropriate to wake up your adolescent to go to shul, and when is it not wise? And that's every situation is unique, and you have to assess the situation carefully. But certainly, a parent has a right to wake up their child in order to get them to do a mitzvah if they feel that will have a positive outcome. Okay.
Like going to school.
Like going to school. Yeah, but parenting today, I mean, I'm telling you, I can't believe some parents, these are real life situations. Parents say, oh, my child needs their sleep, and my child is my best friend, and I don't want to ruin the relationship. And oh my gosh. Millennials. Okay. What's going to happen to the next generation? All right, we got to go have a